We as the United States struggled to ramp production of munitions. People understood if we don't approach this problem in a different way, we're not going to get there. And this is a serious problem that needs to be solved. And there's a serious budget that's going to flow to it. Almost everyone at Castelion, co-founder, employee, all the way up and down the chain, I think really high ownership, really high initiative are critical.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? It's Captain Atterbury with the Lobo Pack Podcast. Today, we are honored to have Andrew Kreitz, the CFO of Castelion. Sir, thank you for being on the podcast.
Honored to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
To start off, if you don't mind talking a little bit about your origin story, how you came to Castelion in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So look, for me, I think national security, defense is something I've cared about for as long as I can remember. I grew up in a very sort of patriotic household. I'm a history buff. I actually wanted to be an Army officer. I was an ROTC cadet at UCLA, and I was an enlisted guardsman in the Cal Guard, or the 18th Cav. Long story, but I was medically disqualified, never had the chance to commission. So I was an econ undergrad, and I geared my career very much towards defense and national security. I figured I wouldn't have the chance to commission, but I could do my part applying the skills that I had developed as a finance professional to try to further national security goals. So I spent a little while as investment banker at Goldman Sachs. I covered aerospace and defense there, helped with mergers and acquisitions and capital raising across the defense sector. For me personally, I wanted to get closer to the product, closer to sort of making an impact on the direction we were taking. So I spent a little while at SpaceX working national security programs there, left with Brian Hargis, who's our CEO, Sean Pitt, who's our COO, to co-found Castelion in late 2022. And now we're working on long-range hypersonic strike and building a very large production facility right here in New Mexico.
Taking us back to, your ROTC time, why want to serve in the Army?
So it's interesting. For me at the time, I thought a lot about that. I joined in 2007, which was still sort of the height of the Iraq War in Afghanistan. The Army was the service that was sort of most in contact. And given sort of the shortfalls in recruitment and what national needs were at the time, I thought that was the place I could make the most impact.
Did you have any parents or family members that served then?
So on my father's side of the family, just because that whole generation, my grandfather, all my great uncles, fought in the Second World War. And then my mom's side of the family, my mom actually emigrated here when she was quite young from Hong Kong. So her side of the family had the sort of experience in southern China during the Second World War as well, and heard a lot of both sides of those stories growing up. I think from my mom's side of the family, she had sort of that very patriotic immigrant experience and really valued the opportunities the United States gave her. And I think that's a big part of sort of the patriotism and appreciation of the country that led me to want to serve.
What part of history did you like or find the most rewarding as a history buff?
I am for some reason a huge Civil War buff. I read way too much about the Civil War. I read a lot of other periods as well. I read a lot about the Second World War, but the Civil War is my forte.
Okay. Any reason why?
It's funny. I honestly don't know. I've thought about this a lot. I'm not sure what calls to me. There was like a family trip when I was young to Gettysburg, and I guess it made some indelible mark on me. I watched the movie Gettysburg too many times as a kid, but that has really stuck with me, and I've read quite a lot about that.
Jumping back to ROTC, did you start off wanting to go SMP? We talked a little bit about that earlier.
I originally wanted to go active duty, to be honest. I had the opportunity to enlist as a guardsman, and although there was some controversy working with my parents on that, I figured I'd still have the opportunity, assuming I was going to commission, to deploy as a guardsman. So that ended up being the path I went down. But truthfully, originally I wanted to be an active duty officer.
Through the SMP program, because we have a lot of students who are SMP, they are able to go through and then commission active, stuff like that. But
I had considered that route down the road. And to be honest with you, it was good getting the experience. I think you get a really good experience as a cadet, but it was very interesting to sort of live the drill experience as well. I thought that was helpful, to be honest.
So talking more about that, what drew you to UCLA to join their ROTC program?
Man, for me, it was really, I went through a lot of schools. Truthfully, I had like a full ride academic scholarship at UCLA. Thought they had, at the time, I thought I was going to go to law school ultimately, and they had some good programs in that direction. So it seemed like a good fit. I ended up pivoting to economics, but ended up being a great experience and worked out well.
And then that being the Bruin Battalion, correct?
Yes.
So we're looking through some of the newsletters that came out, and
Yes.
one of them shows you pieing the face of some other cadets.
Yes.
Did you put on the fundraiser? Is that how you got into raising money?
It was definitely not my idea. However, yes, the MS3s had the opportunity. Actually, each class had the opportunity to pie the class above them, and there were a lot of MS3s taking the opportunity to pie a lot of MS4s in the face. I believe it was like an auction process, and the bids got pretty high. So it was a good fundraiser.
Nice.
Recommend it. You can roll it out here.
Definitely. More on that. What was the ROTC battalion like, and what what lessons did you learn that took you into where you're at today? So
we had a relatively small battalion, from what I'm hearing, relative to UNM. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. It was probably 30 or 40 cadets, but across a pretty big school. Look, I mean, I think you get a lot of lessons, the sort of general lessons around leadership and endurance and discipline and hard work. But I think some of the things that I really drew out of it, that I think about in business, that I think about with some of the challenges that Castelion faces, but then which I think the military faces as a whole today, is in a chaotic environment, or when you're dealing with large groups of people. There's a line from Clausewitz: in war, everything is simple, but even the simplest things are hard. And that was one of the major takeaways, is if you're moving large groups of people, and if you're under pressure, and if you have limited ability to communicate, even mundane things can be really, really challenging. And preparation and organizational cohesion, planning, all these things really, really matter.
That makes sense. More on, because you had started a business earlier, right? Paint.
Oh yeah, it
business and
was.
stuff like
I
that.
did that one summer. That's
Uh-huh.
right.
But did any of that, we're talking about leadership here, like building yourself up as a leader. Did those lessons also sort of help you develop you into who you are today?
Absolutely. I think it's a few different things. There are specific skills that you learn. There are specific lessons, like I said, just around friction and how important planning and rehearsing is. I think a lot of good execution comes down to detail and thinking things through. I mean, there's a reason rehearsal and rehearsing get stressed so much. And we see that. I mean, I still see that pay off today. But then I think a big piece of it is also just the confidence to lead, learning what you are capable of, and also learning how to delegate. And that's something that I think, just being in those situations and doing it over and over and over again, you build the confidence for.
Now, going on from your ROTC timeline, did you get to go to LDAC and things like that?
I did. I was medicaled at LDAC because I somehow managed to have a seizure on the flight line, which was not ideal and put a premature end to my career. But had a great time in advanced camp until then.
What helped get you through that experience, as far as, you can't serve in that capacity?
Honestly, it was really, really disappointing. It was the thing in my life that I put the most energy into and that I was most focused on achieving. And then it's especially hard because all of your friends continue doing it, and I stayed close to a lot of them, and then they commission and go on. But I think that that's where a lot of what I have done in my career since then comes from, is, look, I would like to contribute to national security. I'd like to contribute to sort of national defense in some way. It's really disappointing that I can't do it in the way that I originally intended. But what is my skill set? What can I go do in the private sector or in other parts of the government or whatever it may be? What can I do to still contribute to that? And it's been an exciting path since then, honestly.
Definitely. And then from your time in college, did you immediately go pursue your master's, or?
No, so I worked for KPMG. I worked in the valuation services group for a few years. Really enjoyed my time there, but wanted to pivot my career a little bit. So I went back for an MBA at the University of Chicago. And I knew at that point that I really wanted to channel all of my effort into getting back into aerospace and defense, especially defense. So I went from Chicago Booth to Goldman Sachs. So I was there for about 4 years working aerospace and defense. And then, as I said, onto SpaceX from there.
Looking at Goldman Sachs, obviously
Yeah.
a very prestigious company. What did you do specifically in the company to, I guess, help with defense acquisitions and things like that?
Yeah. So Goldman Sachs is an investment bank. What they do is they help companies raise capital and they help with acquisitions. I would say there's a few transactions there. I won't get into too much detail where I think that we were genuinely helpful in helping aerospace and defense companies raise capital. I think there's a few transactions I was involved in that sort of helped reshape parts of the industry.
Can you elaborate a little bit about that as
Yeah,
far as reshaping the industry? Because even today we see it where, small companies need to raise capital in order to do the things you guys are trying to do.
that's right. And that's one of the things that's really interesting. So I was there from 2016 to 2020. Just to skip to the end there, a big part of the reason I left is because I really wanted to be inside of a company, be close to the product, really help push things forward in a more direct role. Where at Goldman, I really enjoyed my time there. I really liked the people I worked with, really intellectually stimulating job, but you feel like you're still a few steps removed from the product, from the capability. There was, to be honest with you, from 2016 to 2020, there was not a lot of activity in the aerospace and defense sector. So we helped with some consolidations, some acquisitions where the primes would be picking up smaller companies to sort of fold their technology in. What we see today, and I'm happy to chat more about that, is a very different world where there's a lot of startups and a lot of capital. It isn't just sort of the big guys consolidating a couple of smaller and mid-sized companies. Now it's kind of this brave new world of a lot of new companies coming into the fore and bringing new capabilities.
Okay. And then even from back then, was the prime technologies looking at drones? I mean, maybe not to the extent we see today, but drones and, sort of coin operations trying to solve that problem?
So it's really interesting. I think that when I look back on it, for obvious reasons, there was a lot of focus on coin through the 2000s into the early to mid 2010s. In the 2010s, I think people started talking about, the second Obama administration talked about pivot to the Pacific. There was a lot of talk about drones. People were starting to go, okay, maybe there's a threat there that we haven't really taken as seriously as we should have. People start talking about long range fires. But I don't think, sitting in my seat in finance, people were talking about that, but the budgets hadn't moved. The primes were starting to work on the technology, but they hadn't really slammed the gas on it. There wasn't a sense of urgency. And I think that's the big difference between now versus the late 2010s, is there's a lot of urgency. And I think everybody sort of understands how critical it is to pivot to this whole slate of new technologies.
Definitely. Talking a little bit about Goldman Sachs or KP Mag, about organizational structure, especially as somebody new to an organization.
Yep.
Your CEO talked about how, as an engineer, when you get into a new company, like you're sort of, I guess, beat into it. Like, yeah, they have to mold you into somebody to work with them in a certain way. Is that the sort of the same way when you come into a new organization, like at KP Mag or Goldman Sachs?
It is. Both of those organizations have very strong cultures. I think investment banking generally, Goldman especially, has a very unique, very hard charging culture. And I think that there's pluses and minuses to it. But I think the sort of, there's this like relentless demand for rigor and precision. And there is an expectation on everyone that you be willing to just run through walls to get things done, no matter what it takes. And I do think I still carry a lot of that with me. I think there's a lot of lead by example in those organizations, because you see even the senior people will get out there and bust their tails to get things done. And to be honest, I think being inculcated in that kind of a culture earlier in your career is really, really impactful, because it shapes how you approach problems, and it shapes sort of your level of initiative and bias to action.
Okay. Talking a little bit more about risk. What in the investment banking world, from a finance perspective, is risky, especially with the defense industry?
Yeah. So it's interesting. During that era, I'll say kind of all the 2010s, you had a lot of conservatism, I think, from the primes, in part because defense budgets were relatively flat.
When you say the primes, are you talking about like Raytheon and
Exactly.
other companies like
Lockheed,
that?
Boeing, Raytheon,
Okay.
Northrop. And that's not necessarily a criticism of them. It's sort of a function of where defense budgets were. Again, I think people saw kind of these looming threats on the horizon. but there wasn't a sense of urgency about tackling. When I think about risk, I think one of the things that you really take away from finance, economics to a degree, but I think especially finance, is you have to get comfortable with knowing that you don't know. Everything is a set of assumptions about the future. Everything is a probability distribution, and everything is a risk. Trying to manage that and trying to accept that you are going to lose some of the time and you're trying to win on the averages, I think is a really, I guess it's a key insight, but it's also something to just get comfortable with.
Looking back at some of the problems you faced at Goldman Sachs or KP Mag, is it just a problem with analysis and why certain things fail, or is it not forecasting ahead of this might be a problem this might face in the future as far as allocating capital to a certain company with a technology or things like that?
I think an element of it is you have to incorporate as much data as you can, be as precise as you can. You have to kind of optimize for what you know and kind of your known unknowns. And then there's also a big part of risk management, a big part of sort of being humble about this is also understanding how many unknown unknowns there are. You're dealing with, if you just think about a financial forecast, you can pick almost any industry. Let's look at current events, to be honest. You probably didn't take into account the full impact of, say, the current conflict of Iran. That was not knowable for anybody 1 year ago. So you have to plan based on what you know, and then you have to have enough capacity, enough slack, enough forethought about sort of all of these unknown unknowns, because there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and it can change things in ways that you don't expect and in ways that you cannot control.
Very interesting. Okay. Moving forward from that, what drew you to SpaceX, things like that?
Yeah. So, I worked on the aerospace and defense vertical at Goldman specifically because, as I was saying, I wanted to have some positive impact on national security. I wanted to get close to the product. And for me, when I looked at the time, I sort of said, look, I have friends at the Lockheeds and Northrops of the world. They do really good work, but they're big. They tend to be kind of bureaucratic. So who's dynamic, who's early stage, that's doing really interesting, really impactful stuff? Like, where can I go see how this is done and then also have an outsized impact? Honestly, this was in 2020. At the time, there were not very many names in the defense space that were doing that. I think Andrew is well known today, but it was a pretty new company at the time. And when I kind of went down the list of who's having a big impact, SpaceX was top of the list. I knew the things that they were doing in national security launch were very impactful, but there was also a program, it wasn't called this at the time, but there was a government satellite program, which is now called Starshield, that also seemed really interesting and really impactful. And I had the opportunity to help work on that.
Can you talk a little bit more about Starshield?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't go into too much detail here, but think of it as a capability sort of analogous to Starlink. You can commercial internet sold to you via SpaceX satellites. This is sort of, what if you took a lot of the technologies developed for Starlink, and instead of selling commercial internet, you sold that constellation to the US government and worked very closely with them to develop a lot of different, I think, very unique, very interesting capabilities in a proliferated way. So instead of having your one big, giant, very pricey satellite that's way out in geostationary orbit, what if you have many, many Starshield satellites in low Earth orbit? That unlocks a lot of different unique capabilities. And there's really, even today, there's really nobody else that's delivering that kind of capability to the US.
You talked a little bit about how you were 1 or 2 steps removed from the product. When you come to like an organization that's as new as SpaceX, is everybody pretty much right there with the product?
So it's a little bit of a stage of life thing. At SpaceX, very close in terms of being very close to the contracts, very close to the spend, being very close to the engineers, understanding what they need and forecasting and approvals, working with, that's how I got to know Brian, who's our CEO, working very closely with the business development and kind of program architecture teams to figure out what the pricing on the program should be from a government proposal standpoint and how much it's going to cost to go do this. Very cool to be, as a financial professional, very, very close to all that work. And then if I look at, say, the early days of Castelion, that was sort of an even higher level where I was wearing a bunny suit and a respirator helping the engineers make rocket propellants in the early days because there were 12 of us and it was all hands on deck for these. So SpaceX, still early stage, but enough structure around that. It's not like the finance teams were out putting hands on hardware. Castelion, in the early days especially, yes, everyone was putting hands on hardware and doing their part.
Are you mixing you're mixing propellant, stuff like that?
Helping the engineering
Helping the
teams do
engineers?
it. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Now, that was the very, very early days of the company. We're over 200 employees now, and it's very much we've got our engineering design teams, our manufacturing teams, our H&S teams, and everything's very structured. But you still, even we're still early enough stage that for everybody in all the supporting functions, for people on the finance team, you're still very close to the hardware, you're very close to the engineers, and you're working hand in glove with them on pricing, costing, figuring out how to deploy our capital.
At what point did you and your other co-founders decide that America needs more like these hypersonic missiles, things like
Yeah.
that?
So it's interesting. So he was kind of the program architect, and he was the head business development person for what became Starshield. And he got Starshield from an idea. I say he, of course, with an outstanding engineering and manufacturing team, from an idea into what are now multiple programs of record. It was on a really good trajectory. And what we realized was one of the big gaps in capability was long-range strike, especially hypersonics. And one of the things that I think we learned from seeing the way that SpaceX could tackle, say, government satellites, one of your big takeaways from that is you realize, okay, all these programs are behind schedule. They're very, very expensive. It doesn't have to be like that. There are other approaches you can take from an engineering standpoint. Instead of optimizing for the most sort of exquisite capability, you can optimize for manufacturability. You can optimize for low cost. I think we all sort of intuitively understood that could be done. And we understood where the national need was. And I would say it was after the invasion of Ukraine, as we were trying to scale up munitions production and struggling to do it, that was when it became really obvious that, like, look, this is a serious problem. Our adversaries are going to outpace us. And there's an element of, well, if we don't go try to solve this problem, then who's going to go try to solve it?
Definitely. But the risk involved in like going from a company already doing something to founding your own, like what was your guys' decision point? Like, okay, hey, we're going to launch this thing.
Yeah. So it's funny. I mean, I talked to my parents about it. I think they thought I was nuts, but you know what? Fair enough. I think for me personally, a big part of it was what I just said, which is, hey, if we don't do this, then who's going to do it? And then I think confidence that the founding team that we had put together, some of the talent in the Southern California area that we knew would be interested in working with us, we were confident that we knew it would be hard. I don't want to make it sound like we were delusionally optimistic. We knew it'd be really challenging. We knew there was big risk there. It was absolutely not a done deal. But that gave us the confidence to say, all right, let's try to solve this problem.
What was it like, I guess, trying to get capital to even do this? Because
yes,
I imagine that, like, one thing I've heard was that nobody is going to give you money because when you're poor and you don't have any results, nobody's going to give you any money. But when you are doing things, you have results, everybody's going to basically try to fund your thing.
I think the first few months for us, all of us were sort of collectively wondering if we made a terrible mistake. It was very difficult to raise capital in the early days. You have to understand that historically, you go all the way back to the early days of venture capital in Silicon Valley, and there were very close ties to defense. But then what had happened in the last couple of decades was defense was sort of seen as distasteful. A lot of people didn't want to do kinetics, especially. And this is where, to be honest with you, I do think that the Ukraine war is important, because I think for a lot of funds and a lot of firms that might have said, oh, this is this distasteful thing, is there's sort of this wake-up call of, oh, there is an active war in Europe today. This is thinkable. There are adversaries out there that will take offensive action. I think that started to change the thinking. It took a couple of years for it to fully change. But one, people started to get more comfortable with the idea of investing in defense. Two, I think as we as the United States struggled to ramp production of munitions, people understood if we don't approach this problem in a different way, we're not going to get there. And this is a serious problem that needs to be solved. And there's a serious budget that's going to flow to it. And then I think that's what helped us raise our initial seed round. We raised about $4 million in April 23. And then from there, our whole model, our whole engineering approach is get to hardware early, test it early, iterate fast. Our chief engineer, this guy, Jacob Swears, that we worked with at SpaceX, he always says the first thing you build is going to be wrong. The sooner you build it, the faster you find out the ways in which it's wrong. So that's our engineering approach anyway. But going out there and building a lot of hardware and testing it and showing that we could make progress fast, that one, attracted attention from the War Department, and two, kind of help prove to investors, hey, these guys actually can do this. And then we've been generating, I think, a lot of momentum since then.
What were some early victories that you guys achieved with those first tests?
The big push was the summer of 2023, and that was when the company was at its smallest and its least funded, and we had a pretty small group of really committed, really sharp people. And it was, let's show that with a shoestring budget and a small team, we can go build effective solid rocket motors that are performant, and are low cost. And that was a very busy, very intense, very hot summer in the Mojave Desert. But we got to static firing in late July and August. And that was very good proof points. We started off with a couple of direct to phase 2 SBIR contracts with the Air Force Research Laboratory. So that helped make our case to AFRL that, hey, these guys can figure this out and they're worth investing some money in. It showed at that time, Andreessen Horowitz, who very large VC firm, and led another round in September of 2023. That showed them, okay, these guys can get the government to the table and they can actually be scrappy enough to go out and look, it was just the first couple of steps, right? But with a small team, with a small budget, take those first couple of steps. That's enough for us to take a chance.
And then before that, what sort of reputation were you riding on from your time Goldman Sachs and SpaceX? Did your reputation and connections just help with this very initial part of it?
The SpaceX, especially at that stage, the SpaceX much more than the Goldman Sachs, because what firms at that size are really interested in are, hey, do you have the sort of basic engineering chops and initiative to go get this done? And I think a lot of that ethos helped us through the spring and summer, and just being scrappy and having the right attitude. And then, Brian has a long career in aerospace. He was SpaceX for a while, but he was Johns Hopkins APL before that. So he really understands the problem set. He actually has a very good, he spends most of his time on sort of management and business development, but has really good engineering intuition. So his connections with the government and understanding of where the government would want us to drive, that plus just the sort of sheer determination and scrappiness of the engineering team is what really carried us through that first 9 months.
And then what are some attributes of making that initial co-founder team? Brian, Sean, and yourself, how do you guys work together to get problems done or solve things, stuff like that?
We're actually drastically different people with, I think we have sort of different temperaments, different risk profiles, different skill sets. We all have pretty different backgrounds and bring different skills to the board. Honestly, I think that's been really, really helpful. Having three of us that sort of offset each other and check each other and probably drive us towards the middle a little bit has been a really helpful dynamic in a lot of different occasions, even if we do occasionally drive each other crazy.
Awesome. Because I imagine you would want to be super close with people when you get into a partnership sort of like this. Is there anything that stands out for, I guess, yourself as far as, this is what you should look for in co-founders, like personality-wise or character-wise?
I think for almost everyone at Castelion, co-founder, employee, all the way up and down the chain, I think really high ownership, really high initiative are critical. You can find people that are smart, you can find people that work hard, you can find people that are technically skilled. But especially at a startup, there's just so many things going on that need to get done that you need people that are going to look at a problem set and say, this is mine, and I'm going to hell or high water figure out how to solve it. And then they're resourceful enough and high initiative enough to go make that happen. So I think that's almost sort of a precondition that we look for. Other than that, I do think knowing yourself is really important. Knowing and being honest about what you're good at and what you're bad at. And if it's co-founders or early employees, finding people that can offset some of those or fill gaps. But then I think even if you are a manager or a leader or whatever the role might be, if you're building a team, knowing the kinds of people you can manage well, but then also knowing the gaps in your skill set and the gaps in your talents and helping to fill those and being humble enough to know that, hey, I'm glad to have somebody that is better at this than I am. I think that's really important.
Definitely. Um, going from that, can you talk a little bit about daily burn rate and why it's important for like a CFO to understand in their company?
Yes. So at any given time, I'll say two things actually. First of all, the whole point of Castelion is that we are able to produce large numbers of hypersonic weapons at low cost. If we are not monitoring our spend and if we're not trying to do things in a low cost way and keeping ourselves honest, then we are missing the whole point of why we are around. So I think culturally monitoring that managing cost, I think is really, really important just to keep that ethos. So I think that's important. But then as a more practical matter, one, we can't do anybody any good if we've run out of money. So forecasting, tracking spend, being smart in the way that you spend it is really important. But two, sitting where we sit right now, it's interesting. There's a lot of different problems that we want to go solve. So our first product that we're bringing up is called Blackbeard, which is a tactical boost glide weapon. But when I think about within the universe of Blackbeard, we're building this factory. There's certain things that we might want to verticalize and produce in-house, and that might accelerate development in certain ways, or it might increase throughput. There's other adjacencies to Blackbeard that we may want to go pursue. So having a close track of what do we actually have the capital to go execute on? What's going to return earlier? And that isn't just about sort of profit or attracting more capital. It's sort of the practical matter of if we can get this product working and the government's excited about it and we're producing these and earning a profit, then we can now redeploy that in attacking all the other problems that we want to go solve. So there's a very practical, hey, what do we want to do? What can we afford to do? How can we attack those problems in the most efficient way?
Okay. Talking about Blackbeard and Ranger,
Yes.
Project Ranger, what's the naming convention you guys have behind certain names for certain things?
So with Blackbeard, it's sort of funny, and this goes for Castelion as well. I will tell you that if you ever try to name something, you will discover that virtually every name is taken once you start looking. So Blackbeard was the result of, I think it was Sean's idea, actually, is my recollection. But we solicited a lot of different ideas from around the company. And one, it stuck. People like the name. And two, to be honest with you, I think we like the idea of, as a new entrant, we're sort of the rogues, the pirates here, coming in with a different angle, different approach, and changing the way the game is played. So we sort of like that it embodies some of that ethos. And then Ranger comes down to sort of, there's a lot more we want to do. There's a lot more cross defense that we want Castelion to start to take on over the course of the next decade. But this is the first move. This is the first facility, the first production site. This is what's going to be, well, both scouting, but also sort of planting the flag for everything we want to do in the future. And Rangers lead the way.
Airborne. Castelion.
Yes.
What's the naming convention behind it? Just because, reference to a castle, right?
To a castle, or to the Castellan is like the keeper of a castle. I will be honest, we, in the early days, had a different name. We used to be called Palace, and it turns out that name, Pallas, and it turns out that there's a few other companies that are also named Palace that took umbrage at that. So we needed to pivot and devise a new name, and we decided we are going to pick a made-up word, and we are going to Google the heck out of it to make sure no one else has the same name, just to make sure this never happens again. Once again, if you ever have to name something, it's a lot harder than you might think. We went through a lot of ideas, but everyone liked that. Everyone liked the reminiscence of a castle or keeper of a castle, and nobody else had it. So
awesome.
I will do it.
Cool. And then now that Project Ranger's underway, and you guys have broken ground, when can we expect Blackbeard to sort of start taking off?
So one of the conditions when we were doing the site selection, one of the requirements was really speed, because we have a lot of pressure from our customers to deliver Blackbeard as soon as possible. So we wanted a site where we could get moving quickly. New Mexico has delivered in spades. We've been really impressed. There is a lot of construction underway right now. We've got steel up on our first 4 buildings. We are aiming to have major construction done on the site in late Q3, early Q4. We'll have a lot of process equipment arriving throughout Q4. And our intent, our production pathfinders, and we call them power builds, basically the test builds for Blackbeard, we want to be kicking that off at the end of this calendar year and be doing that throughout early 27. Our goal is that we are shipping the first serial produced units of Blackbeard to our customers in calendar year 2027.
Talking about Blackbeard, what for people who don't understand, is it the Army that's shooting it out of the MLRS system?
Yeah.
Like, where does it go?
So that's one of the really key points in our approach. One of the things that we knew was important when we started the company was focus. We didn't want to run it too many projects at the same time. We wanted to have a smaller number of products we were developing that had a lot of general applicability. So with Blackbeard, right now we're under contract with both the Army and the Navy to integrate Blackbeard onto Army HIMARS and for the Navy to integrate it onto FA-18. So it can be ground launched, it can be air launched. There's other platforms we're looking at that we're optimistic we're going to be able to integrate it onto. And the reason that's so important for us is we want it to be a really general purpose, really flexible weapon that can be used by all the branches, launched from a lot of different platforms. And that's a big part in how we're able to drive the production rate up and the cost down. Because if we're scaling up and we've got a lot of different users, and one of our requirements is there can't be tons of changes between the HIMARS versus the F-18 configuration, it needs to basically be the same missile, we can get a really efficient production process going and then have these really minor changes towards the end of the line that determine whether it's air launched or ground launched.
And then because it's such a general weapon, what has your relationship been with defense acquisition and then actual military leaders are coming out to actually view this when you guys are doing your tests?
So I'll be honest with you. I think we have been really happy and really impressed and, almost surprised really with how quickly the acquisition community has been moving. I think for this administration in particular, but I'd say it's a bipartisan effort, but for this administration in particular, reforming acquisition and creating more room for new entrants has been a real priority. And that's really showing in the ways that we've been interacting with the War Department. And I think we've been really impressed with how forward-leaning both Army and Navy leaders have been in supporting us and in really breaking down a lot of barriers to help us move fast. So there's with weapon systems, a lot of times the part that you fall down on is weapons integration. So it isn't actually developing the missile, it's trying to figure out how to, get it to talk to the HIMARS software or whatnot. I can't get into too many specifics there, but both the Army and the Navy have been really committed to supporting our development effort, but they've also been really smart in kind of debottlenecking some of the weapons integration effort and getting us in front of the right people early so that we can identify problems and burn those problems down and not have this long tail at the end of development that's going to slow us down.
When guys have gotten this far, does the military provide you with equipment to say, hey, you tested out of this, like weapon systems, stuff like that?
Ultimately, yes.
Okay.
So we will be getting some hardware we actually already have some. I won't get into too many specifics there, but we'll be getting more from Army and Navy to support that integration effort and moving towards live fires of Blackbeard.
Okay. Do you guys plan or foresee White Sands missile range, things like that, more somewhere you'll test it? Or?
So we actually did a couple of launches last year at a spaceport, and I think some of our IRAD, our internally funded research launches, we may return there this year. I think White Sands, Dugway in Utah, we did a big launch last year at a Point Mugu Sea range. All of those are on the table for tests over the next 12 months for us.
And then talking more about the culture and things like that at Castelion, it seems like you guys are relentless. You guys are always trying to solve problems, but do you guys prioritize having your employees are trying to get out, stuff like that?
It's challenging, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people have been running through walls. Our engineers have been working around the clock really since the start of the year in order to drive a major redesign cycle and prepare us for testing. And it's tough sometimes because our customers are counting on us to deliver and we don't have a lot of time in which to work. So we do what it takes. We do try to sort of monitor how far people have to go and how tough it is and try to cycle people out, try to give people, when we can, weekends off. But I'll be candid. Sometimes it's hard and it's all hands on deck. I think it's going to be a little bit of a sprint for us for the next 18 months and change. But I think it's also important, especially as the organization grows, even if you can't give everybody blocks of time off, try to honor PTO requests, try to throw people out of the office if they've been there for too long, try to grow the team so people don't have to be nose to the grindstone all the time. But I would say the practical reality is it's hard work.
And then because you guys are such a small company, you guys are pretty much tight knit across the board.
It's really interesting. I would say yes, but it's also a little bit of a transition because we spent so long being a few dozen people and everybody was quite close. If we're going to be able to tackle this problem, we need to keep scaling, and we've pretty quickly grown to above 200 people. So I think I've been thinking about this a lot lately. We as a leadership team need to put energy into maintaining that cohesion and making sure that people stay close, because it just inherently becomes harder as the company scales. And it's something that when you're small, it's natural. You don't even really have to think about it. It just sort of happens. And as you grow, it's something that I think we need to be thoughtful about and deliberate about to sustain that culture.
Definitely. For my last question, green or red?
Christmas.
Christmas.
Christmas
for
all
sure.
the way.
Yeah, definitely agree. But we really appreciate it, sir. Thank you for being on the podcast. And can't wait to hear what happens with Project Ranger and what you guys do in the future.
No, thank you very much. It's going to be a very exciting year.
Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you.